In this video, I'm going to go over a few of the steps and tools and techniques for doing an editorial layout. And I've got my content that I've borrowed from Malia. Thank you, Malia. And I thought I'd show you kind of the finished layout, and then we'll go back and I'll show you the process I used to build the layout. If I turn off the content, you'll see that I have my grid is placed in my layers at the very bottom. All right, so then I started building page one. You can work however you want, but I kind of wanted the headline text to be the focal point, and I also needed to have the graphic, the painting, Van Gogh's painting on the first page as well. So those are the two things I started working with. Think about what your focal point is, and then put that content down first and make it work, and then you can fit in the rest of the content around that. And I knew that I didn't need some of this content right off the start. It looked something like this when I started. And I've got the text in white, so let me just select this. And maybe I'll just assign a color to it so we can see it there. Okay, so that's what I started with, just working, and this is kind of a nice thing to do because I've got my grid here, and I can estimate when I put my content down. My grid is really nice because I can estimate how to center it quite easily, and then I knew the placement of things. Then I started pulling out my guides to build the overall rectangular format. All right. Then from there, and I spent a little bit of time playing with the proportion of my blooming and plums. And for me, those were kind of the first things to explore the typeface, which typeface I was going to use, what size. And when I click on this and I open up blooming, you'll see that I've got the bee on its own layer, right? And then the rest of the word on its own layer. And part of the reason I did that was because I wanted to have like the first letter to be oversized, and I needed to separate those in order to be able to work more efficiently with them. When it was all one line, then I had a hard time resizing some of the letters. So if you have to put certain letters on their own layers so that you can work with them more efficiently, you can certainly do that. So that's kind of where I started off with. I kind of got those three elements in there, and I played with proportions, and I played with positioning, and part of it is just judging. But if you're using some guidelines to kind of make your decisions, like for example, there's a reason why this ended up being here, because I really like the relationship here between this descender on the G. So any typeface that has like the letters descend below the baseline, that's your descender. And then any part of the letter that ascends above where the X height is, like the height of your lowercase letters, which is like at the top of the U and the M. So any part up here, those are ascenders. Now, the capital P, has its own little flair going on here. But so I really wanted to kind of build those two so that they still had some kind of a visual connection, those two words, because that's really the main part of the headline. So I kind of played around with positioning and size. And then the second part of the headline is Japanism, and then this is a different typeface. You can kind of mix and match your typefaces, but you really want to create like a focal point, and then everything else should support that. So I didn't want this typeface competing with the blooming plums. It couldn't be too big, it couldn't be too heavy. With the ampersand, you can see kind of the height here. It's kind of relative to the height of the J. So somehow I feel like those were matched okay. X height is not only good for legibility in your columns, and I'm going to set a column of type in a minute and talk about Excite specifically. But you can also be a very good criteria for matching your typefaces. That's kind of where I started. After I got the focal point established, then I decided to kind of work with the color a bit, and I really like the warm colors in this painting, and I really wanted to have a pop of color and not a white background on the left page. So I'm going to select my type elements, and then sometimes when you're working with, especially with type, and if it gets big, it's kind of hard to make selections. So this is when, if you have your layers labeled, then it can really help with going in and making selections through your layers. So so I'm going to select all of that type and make it white. Turn on. There we go. Okay. And all of a sudden it looks a lot different with white on a colored background. And then from there, I knew that I wanted to have Van Gogh's name somewhere in the layout, and I didn't put that in immediately. Actually, the next element I put in, I wanted to have like a little bit of information about the story. In editorial design, this is called a kicker, and it's like a few sentences, and it's kind of right near the beginning of the story with the headline. And the idea is that if people read the headline, they might read the kicker, and then you kind of have them hooked. So it's kind of a way to entice the person to, read, and then they'll continue reading. Okay, so that's a kicker. And I ended up using, I kind of played with the different versions, but I kind of wanted this text to support, now I'm placing things in, and I want all of my support elements to kind of work, not compete with the focal point, but support the focal point. So I kind of like a right alignment here. I kind of like that negative space that it's because I feel it's kind of just snugged in there. And then the left rag is I thought it was just kind of appropriate. I thought it fit in nicely, and it's clean and it fits that space. And then the last part was the Vincent van Gogh, and I think I've reduced, it's only 72% opacity, and I was really playing with how light can I make it, because I don't want it to jump out, and I ended up positioning this not so much in relation to the grid at this point and the columns, but in relationship to the B letter. So I kind of played around with where it seemed to be connected to the B, okay? And then work with your type to create a headline. And then when you have your focal point, or if there's, in my case it was the painting and the headline, then everything else I put in was meant to kind of support that.